Does anybody remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books as a kid? Because even though it was a very structured environment and it was designed for you to feel as if you were actually choosing your adventure, each point of the story where you had to make a pivotal decision, depending on whether you go down the volcano or you enter the dragon's cave, that is a point of controlled friction, intentional friction.
Welcome to another episode of TechBytes. I'm your host for this episode, Bobby Brill, but more importantly, that was Dai Li, who serves as an AI ethicist here at ServiceNow, and also joining us on the episode is Hayley Mortin, a UX researcher at ServiceNow as well. Both of whom have been our guests before, but because they have such unique perspectives on where AI is going, we wanted to have them back on to talk more in depth about the concept of controlled friction, what that means and how it pertains to creating good AI. So, Dai, please reintroduce yourself to us and give us a bit more about your background.
Hello, world. My name is Dai Li, and I am a human-centered and ethical AI design strategist at ServiceNow. And I work on the Trust and Governance Lab as well as the experience organization on the product side to really help put forth responsible AI development and design at ServiceNow. A lot of my expertise in human-centered AI is around building out the frameworks and tools that promote responsible AI development practices. And I'm also a technology creator. I'm an ambassador for Google Women's Tech Makers, and I'm heavily involved with CES as an Innovation Awards judge. But mainly, I just want to encourage the dialogue and the discourse around responsible AI and what impact does it have on society and people.
So just how the world is going to be changing, you're going to point.
I am part of the group of people that are out there with flags, pitchforks, fires, and everything saying, hey, let's make technology good for people and let's make sure and be critical about the technology we're making and that we're looking at it with a magnifying lens to ensure that the outcomes are what we actually want as a society.
So no small feat.
Fortunately, there's many of us, including my co-podcast person here today, one of my favorite people, Hayley.
I hate to say it because it's a tough act for me to follow, so please, Hayley, introduce yourself too, because what you're bringing to this conversation is really unique and special as well. So Hayley, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Hayley Mortin. I am a UX researcher here at ServiceNow. I'm primarily working on the AI ML platform team. So what that means is that I get to go out and talk to the end users of folks that are actually going to be consuming and using the AI products that we're building. I get to do a bit of that vibe checking that Dai is also doing to make sure that we're going in the right direction. And I'm really lucky that our team is really focused on advocating for that more human-centered AI design experience. I get to go out and actually watch people interact with our tools and our technology and come back and say, hey, they think it's scary. Maybe we should rethink this.
I like to say that Hayley and her team and the UX research team, they are the voice of reason behind products. And they are the people that are trying to champion and be the voice of reason to make the rest of us do better, be better, and provide better.
That's why I wanted the two of you on today, because this voice of reason, this controlling how AI works is really important, especially from the idea that, Dai, you mentioned human-centered AI, and Hayley, UX is all about usability, how the human does the thing and interacts with the thing. There's humans creating AI, there's humans using AI, and there is a friction point there.
Yes. I want to give an analogy that Hayley and I have both been using when we were describing generative AI. And intentionally, we've been comparing it to a not very smart in terms of AI capability system, but smart as in a deeply rich, research-backed, heavily industry-founded algorithm capability that also has a ton of financing around it, which is slot machines.
The interaction of pure humanity and robots.
Yes, the interaction of pure humanity and robots. Perfectly said. Because there are a few realms in technology that exude that weird allure of unpredictability as captivatingly as generative AI has been since ChatGPT kind of democratized this access and slot machines. And there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of industry discussions in every vertical. You have creative people that are concerned about what does this mean for content generation, for the writers of the world, for the artists of the world. You have moviegoers that are saying, like, how can you discern between AI generated movie clips and video clips and audio clips versus human generated one? And the one thread of consensus around all of this, even in technical industry, when we start looking at software generation and UX work and any type of work that is generated by AI, there's a common thread in all of the discourse around this, which is that there's still an inherent desire by a majority of humanity and people that work in a specific industry to delineate whether something was created by artificial intelligence or humanity. Earlier, when you and I were getting to know each other, we had a conversation about vinyl and how analog is still alive. There is something inherently valuable in what people create, in that creativity and that slow pace of creation that has a very deep value to people in general. Now, as I merge that topic with UX design and the modern day corporate culture and businesses and startups, it's banging on the point that generative AI brings in unpredictability. There is no perfect system even before generative AI and classical versions of AI. But there's this point where that unpredictability can actually enhance in addition to the challenges it brings to UX. There's this thing that tension and friction and like working out and doing 100 sit-ups does, or like the One Punch Man workout. There's things that those things do that make us as humans thrive in a different way. So I think that in guiding the development of software and services in these two worlds, we can find ways to harmonize them, maybe not in a perfect balance, but at least in a way where one can service the other in a positive way. I think one is like embracing that unpredictability for creativity. Generative AI has this potential to introduce novel and creative elements that sometimes in its weird output forces us to be a little more creative. And I think it forces us now, because of that wanting to discern between AI and human, it's making more people look at things from a user-centered approach and applying a design process, even if they weren't part of the UX world and didn't understand what a design process is and what it means to be human-centered.
It's interesting you brought up several points, and I know, Hayley, you're going to expand on some of these too. That journey is the destination really only works when we have things to trip over and bridges to cross and rivers to traverse. So, Hayley, explain that to us. Explain this, what that concept is to make AI and UX work the way we want it to.
I love this question. So I think I have to answer it with a very short UX history lesson. So when you talk about good UX, a lot of people love to cite things like Steve Jobs and the beginning of the iPod. Oh my gosh, they were solving problems we didn't even know we had. So easy to use, so simple, so intuitive, the things that people continuously compliment Apple on, if you think of thinking about Apple products. And this is all very intentional. It's through years and years of research and development and design. We can thank design thinkers like Don Norman, who championed this idea of making things as easy to use as possible. It's this whole idea of if a user has a task that they want to complete, so whether that's listening to music, sending an email, whatever it is, we want that as UX designers to be a simple and frictionless, easy to use experience where our end user isn't making too many steps to get to that destination. But with the rise of generative AI, all of this starts to go out the window. Things don't behave in a predictable way anymore, the same way that systems of early 2000s technology did, where it was like, I have a task I want to complete, and here's how I complete it. Now we're looking at a realm of more here's something that I think might happen, but I'm also not 100% sure what I'm going to get. I'm not 100% certain of what the system will generate or do. So we've seen that with things like Midjourney and ChatGPT, where it's really a black box experience. You put your prompt in and you're hinged on this moment of what's going to come out on the other side. So we have to design very differently for that experience compared to how we would design things in the past 20-ish years of technology.
I think all of us here in this conversation who are using AI a lot, professionally and personally, that fear of, I don't know what's going to come out isn't a fear. It's exciting, and almost a little too exciting, I think, when people push out generative AI without any guardrails, correct?
Exactly. And it's super exciting when it's just like me and my laptop on Midjourney trying to come up with the most absurd images ever. I mean, when DALL-E Mini came out, there were all these awesome things floating around on Twitter like Cucumber Connect 4. But then we also have to remember that people are seeing this as a massive business opportunity. They're like, how can we plug this technology for our work? How can we use it to optimize lengthy business processes? What if it creates something that I don't like? Or maybe it denies somebody a loan that was applying for it that should have gotten it. The stakes are a lot higher than me just playing around on Midjourney and being like, that's so funny.
Yeah, and Hayley and I talk about this often, but speaking of Midjourney, going back to the slot machine analogy, I don't know if you've seen on TikTok, on Instagram, there's entire channels dedicated to, for example, a very popular rap, but in the tone of Frank Sinatra. Or give me the birthday song, but in the voice of Ariana Grande. And
Snoop Dogg reading you the Bible.
Exactly. And initially, it seems like people aren't selling it. They're not monetizing their channels. It doesn't seem nefarious. But when you start asking critical questions that we do in thinking about responsible AI, it really starts bringing up questions like, do we own our own identity? Do we own the likeness of ourselves? Say for some reason you give the keys to someone else and say, yes, you can use my likeness to create a AI version of it, an audio visual version of it. Do you own it in perpetuity? How long do you own that for?
Sure.
So we start thinking about, when people ask me what is my biggest concern when it comes to especially generative AI and like immense AI potential, is it privacy? Is it societal impact? I go, it's actually human autonomy. And it's really understanding, like, how do we navigate the identity that we've curated around ourselves and who we are, especially when we start thinking about artists and their identity and their work that now could be repurposed. On one hand, it's the ingenuity and the creativity of hearing Frank Sinatra rap to a Snoop Dogg song. But then on the other hand, would Frank Sinatra have wanted to?
And Hayley, I want you to button that back up, because you mentioned if you're doing this at a corporate level, if you can mimic tone and voice and corporate speak, and this email reads like a corporate company with a lot of prestige and respect sending out emails that could be phishing or whatever, that's something that we have to prevent. And that's really where these ideas of friction and stopgaps and guardrails really come in, correct?
Absolutely. So in my role, I work a lot with customer service agents and some of the generative AI tools that we roll out to them. We do a lot of concept testing. So we put a lot of things that don't exist yet as a prototype in front of customer service agents and say, hey, what would you think of this? What would your perspective be of using a tool like this at work? And that might come in the shape of helping them generate responses to emails, helping them summarize the steps that have already been taken to resolve a case that's on their desk. Something really interesting that also comes up in those conversations are the ways that agents are already using generative AI in their work. So there's a little bit of a dipping their toes into it, but there's also still a ton of hesitation about what is this thing that we're inviting into our work and what kind of repercussions could it have. So one of the biggest risks that continues to come up in almost all of the conversations I have with service desk agents about generative AI is this concept of authorship. And I think it goes really tightly into what Di has been saying about would someone have wanted that song to be written in their voice? But the corporate version of that is if I am writing a draft to an email and AI is making suggestions of how I can adjust my tone for the customer that I'm responding to, who's writing that email? Is it me? Is it the AI? Where does that authorship and ownership begin and end? And customer service agents are super concerned about who's to blame if something totally wrong happens. So say it gets a detail wrong, and a case that we sometimes talk about is maybe someone's trying to submit a ticket to go on parental leave. And there's two policies. There's one for the birthing parent and one for the non-birthing parent. And let's just say that the AI gets it wrong and says, oh, you only have a couple of weeks off, or whatever the company policy is. This is going to have tremendous effects on the actual person who's trying to get their time off, while the agent is just spent resolving the errors and the mess that AI made on their behalf. So there's this really blurry line of, is it my fault because I didn't check the AI? Is it the AI's fault because it wasn't trained on the right data? They're really nervous about what it means actually being implemented into their work like that. This is where we can put in some of those guardrails, in some of those stopgaps to make sure that the experience isn't pushing AI into places where the end user doesn't necessarily want it to belong. And it gives them a lot more agency in pausing and thinking about what's actually happening.
How does that work, though? How does explain this concept that is controlled friction? How do you break a machine?
It's not breaking it. It's not breaking it.
So controlled friction is sort of the antithesis of that notion we were talking about earlier about a frictionless, intuitive experience, the things that we typically associate with quote unquote good UX. But sometimes you want there to be friction. Sometimes it's what the user actually needs to complete their task even more. So let me anchor us in an example. There's a feature that's built into most email platforms, Gmail, Outlook, whatever, where if you're sending an email to someone and you say, please find the PDF attached, and then you try to send that email, but there's no attachment, there'll be a pop-up that comes up and says, hey, were you trying to send a PDF? That's an example of controlled friction. It's preventing you from sending the email, but it's there to give you a moment of reprieve to sort of think about, hey, I actually should probably go back and attach that invoice or whatever it was I was trying to send.
I like to make the gaming analogy too. For my RPG fellow nerds out there who play, or actually taking it back, let's step out of software entirely, right? Does anybody remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books as a kid?
The greatest books ever, yes, of course.
The best book, because even though it was a very structured environment and it was designed for you to feel as if you were actually choosing your adventure, each point of the story where you had to make a pivotal decision, depending on whether you go down the volcano or you enter the dragon's cave, that is a point of controlled friction, intentional friction. It was intentionally designed by the author to give you a moment to make a critical decision, to understand and weigh the potential outcomes of what could benefit you and then what optimize your desirable outcome. And that's a version of it.
You had corrected me, and I was too loud to let you say this, but I would love you to explain, both of you explain this. I said break the machine, and of course that's incorrect because this is helping it. How do we convince the people we work with who want AI to be here now, yesterday, ready to go, let's roll it out, to implement a lot of these stopgaps and friction? How do we do that?
Going back to intuitive designs and how we design for that, along came our metrics for success as UX practitioners to kind of mimic that. So as a UX researcher, we have to measure things like time on task or number of clicks and try to minimize that. We want the least amount of time to complete the most amount of things. That's usually how UX manifests itself in a corporate way. But we're at a really interesting point with generative AI where we really have to rethink some of those metrics, because do we want people to be rushing through a task if it's introducing all of this uncertainty? I think we actually need to be incorporating more barriers and more moments of pause for the end user to actually take a look at and evaluate critically what types of responses the AI is giving them. So it is a bit of an interesting point for us to help our PMs, our designers who are so like, make it as easy to use as possible, make it more intuitive, make it this, make it that, to take a second and rethink, hey, maybe we're actually mitigating a lot of risk down the line by introducing these stopgaps now. It might not seem like it. And maybe they're even taking longer to do things that were normally faster. But look at all of the risk that we're mitigating by introducing these moments to pause.
I would like to even reflect the mirror back to you in the sense that individuals like you that have been curating spaces for Hayley and I to have these conversations where it doesn't feel like we're screaming into an empty void actually feels very aspirational and hopeful for us in the sense that people want a more discerning look at AI and people are interested in hearing this aspect because the responsible and the ethical parts aren't always the flashiest, fanciest, but it's very encouraging to hear or have this space to be able to talk about these type of things.
And that seems to be an answer to the idea of friction that we want this. This is good.
Yeah.
This is
actually,
a great thing.
I would love to, earlier you mentioned like breaking the system, but you're like, not, it's making it better. I really wanted to echo that point because you nailed it in the latter half, which is that when we talk about AI, just like regular software, it is impossible to create a perfect system. I want to put that out there. With technology, with everything in this world, there's nothing that is perfect except ice cream. Ice cream might be perfect. But
Ben and Jerry did nail Chunky Monkey, I have to admit.
But another version of controlled friction that is a collaboration between human and AI. We often talk about human in the loop or human AI collaboration or human robot collaboration and varying themes of that such is that allowing the human to oversee various points of AI outputs and provide input on, hey, does this look right or not, is a critical point and way of making the AI better at what it does. For example, if you have a AI that is summarizing a specific thing for work, and at one point of summarizations, you can show a human and say, hey, which of these summarizations are better? Which one resonated with you more? Which one was easier to understand? That simple interaction can start telling us a lot about how to improve the system, like the type of language we use, the length that people are willing to read, how to space things, and so much more.
I'm gonna ask you both a final question on this because we can spend more time talking about this, and we will for sure, to wrap up this idea of controlled friction. A question came up to me that sounds slightly pandering because we all work for a corporation and this in the best way possible. Will corporate Gen AI be the type of AI that makes AI better?
Oh, I gotta think about this one.
I know. I just wrote this down. I know the answer to this. But the reason I asked that is a lot of what you're saying is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not the expert on this, that to make AI better, we need stopgaps, controlled friction, we need control. And who better than somebody that is dealing with mountains of regulations and teams of people going, all right, break out the no-no book and let's go through this and figure out how we make this work. Is that a good assumption?
Yes, and I'm going to say this I hope our audience is not rolling their eyes, and I promise, stick with me here. I'm going to say yes and no for two reasons. Yes, because again, with that November, when ChatGPT was released, this fourth wall to the public was broken, where a technology that was before only privy to researchers, practitioners, and the tech sector is now available to nurses, doctors, the florists, teachers, students, everyone equally, to some degree. We have to start thinking about internet technology access, but that's an entire separate, different, worthy discussion to have. But what generative AI did differently is it put AI in a relatable lens. I would like to say that most of the public and most of the people we talk to, they don't discern between this before ChatGPT and after ChatGPT era. They
Sure.
see it an evolution of capabilities, and AI is AI. It's just better and in some ways more human-like now than it was before. And I think with that new capability, it forced people and expedited the types of conversations you just brought up around regulation and so forth. We noticed like GDPR and the European Union and the EU AI, there was a lot of consideration on the Europe side on how to handle privacy and ethics and AI. Singapore is a big thought leader in that space as well too. But ChatGPT forced America, which has always been let the people, they're very laissez-faire, let people do as they will first, not in the way you mentioned, but in a different way, force us to improve and be more critical in the way that we're safeguarding AI. The way I say no is I think it's still different in the sense that I don't think generative AI is the end-all be-all in the type of AI that we need and what we use. There's still a lot of value. Like, I think there's a lot of value in first asking the question, do we need AI for this specific use case? Do we even need a powerhouse system to do this particular thing? There's a lot of companies out there that are still using the very effective algorithms around classification models, similarity models, and so forth that have been around for the past many decades. And I really want people to look at, why do you need AI for this? Do you need AI for your use case? And what do you want to do with it? Those are the questions that we're trying to get people to think about before thinking that they need this generative AI model in order to stay ahead of the curve.
Hayley, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think it's going to be that corporations and I don't mean that in a Fight Club dystopian way. I mean in the very good way of, we're all smart people trying to make this work because we all see the potentiality of it and the benefits of it. But you're in the trenches, so to speak, of making this really go. What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I love this question. It's interesting because I think a lot of end users actually think that because their enterprise and their organization is deploying AI, that it inherently makes it more trustworthy. So they think, oh, my organization's using this thing, it must be great. I've actually heard a lot in user interviews. I've been doing UX research on AI for the past 3 years. So I've seen it pre-ChatGPT and post-ChatGPT, if we want to use that terminology. And one thing sort of anecdotally that I've realized, or that I've noticed in the past little while, is that I've noticed a lot less of people bringing up Terminator analogies when I say like less Skynet terminology, which I think is really interesting because there's more of a proliferation of it. But because of that, people are like, I use ChatGPT. I can totally imagine using some other form of AI at work. So I would be wary of people putting too much trust in AI and over-relying on it and saying blindly, oh, I think that no matter what AI my organization adopts is going to be 100% perfect. So my concern as a UX researcher is making sure that our end users have realistic expectations that AI is not a perfect solution all the time, because it does have the ability to generate really convincing sounding information. And I think if their organization helped to implement that, they might think, oh, it must be true. So for us as UX researchers, I think making sure we're informing our users, empowering them with the knowledge to make critical decisions, giving them little peeks into that black box saying, hey, it's not going to be perfect. That's on UX design and UX research to make sure that we're doing our due diligence there and reminding folks that it's never going to be perfect.
With that being said, what are some best practices? What can we all do to ensure that the product that we're putting out is good? And I mean good with a capital G-O-O-D, good, ready to go.
Involve your UX teams early and involve them often. More feedback is what we want to aim for here, especially in this time where we're sort of redefining the game for UX design and research, and a lot of rules are being rewritten in front of us. But what I think is really exciting is we can decide how those rules look, and we can do that by incorporating UX research consistently throughout the product development lifecycle and making sure that things get put in front of users before they get put in front of developers.
Fabulous. Di, any takeaways, any things we should all be thinking about?
Yeah, and I promise I'm not pandering in this, because in this case, like, for a lot of reasons, I was the single person that met another single person that met another single person and then formed a responsible AI gang. But I think when I first meet people and I tell them about this and they learn about our work, there's this sense of this daunting task that is ahead. And it doesn't have to be that way. Whether you are an individual or a team that just happens to be thinking about AI in a specific way, it is very possible for you to influence the outcomes, the frameworks, the positioning, the way people talk about technology, and how it ends up getting released to you and your team. For example, someone reached out to me by chance, and they were an individual from a mobile QA team, and they ended up contributing a lot of feedback to some of the writings that we were putting out around AI. And I used their feedback directly. So I think if you provide that guidance and that feedback, even if you are not what you think as the portrait of an AI practitioner, I promise you the people that are working on this and thinking about it will be very thankful for your feedback and contribution. Because many times it's hard to find people that are willing to have a conversation about it, contribute, and say something.
So there you have it, a better understanding of what controlled friction is and how it's used to create not only good AI, but a good experience. And of course, for even more answers on working with the ServiceNow platform, head over to docs.servicenow.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe on whatever platform you're on so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening.